What's up, people about penguins? So hopefully we're on the right thing and it's all working for us. If not, hopefully you figured out that I started the stream somewhere else, and yes, it did not work. So let me just quickly get to the right screen. Hi, what's up, y'all? My name is Tiffany Jones, and I am coming to you from Georgia, AP Bio Penguins. And today we're going to work on ecology. Okay, so you may be thinking to yourself,
Hopefully
well,
we're on
why
the
did I
right thing
start
and it's all
out
working for us.
saying like AP
If
Bio
not,
Penguins? Um, it's because of the fact that you are in your nice little cutesy little tuxedos and you are now dressed for success. You are ready to rock and you are ready to roll. So without further ado, let's kind of get a little background. So I run AP Bio Penguins. So if you're not aware of those resources yet, you really need to be aware of those resources. I do daily review on Instagram. So hopefully you already knew about this because of the fact that the review has been going on for the past, I don't know, since February 1st. And so I have actually finished all the topics in the CED. And at this point, I'm going to go through the 2023, I'm sorry, the 2013 exam next, like from a couple years ago. And then I'll just be doing Q&A until the exam. But on my website, you'll find that there is a 374-page review guide. So at this point, since we are 12 days away from the exam, you want to be using that for your multiple choice practice and your fear response practice, and then just kind of hitting the topics that you might be weaker in. So like if you know that you struggle in biotechnology, then you would go find the 6.8 topic and you could work through the questions that are on 6.8. I have FRQ Friday, so I've gone through every single free response from 2013 to current. I'm ignoring 2020 when, the world did its stuff. And so I have an FRQ video explaining every single one of those. So after you do an FRQ, you can go to the video and kind of listen to it and see what you could have written, kind of see what some students have written. Or you could just pull the video up and as I say the question, you then composite, come up kind of what you think the answer is, and then go ahead and go from there. I also have quizzes games. So there's 120 games open already for you. Just go to quizzes.com, type in the 8-digit code, and you'll be able to access those games. So I've got one for every single topic. I've got some just overall review ones. I've got the 2013 exam on there that you could practice it that way. There's tons of games on there, as well as I've got review PowerPoints. Plus, of course, we have all these live streams. So, of course, you can access all that on my website, www.apbiopenguins.weebly.com. So today we're going to work through energy flow. We're going to look at population ecology, community ecology. We'll do some practice questions, as always, and then I'll have time for a little bit of Q&A at the end. So without further ado, energy flow. So first thing is that organisms have to be able to use energy in order for them to maintain, organize, and grow, reproduce. That's straight out of the CED. And so kind of thinking about the first law of thermodynamics that say that energy cannot be created or destroyed, but it can be transformed and transferred, right? So all of the energy that we have on Earth all came from the sun, and then it was absorbed by our photosynthetic materials that are able to convert that light energy into chemical energy. And then we, of course, use that chemical energy, turn into other forms of energy, and we release in the form of heat. So all the energy then leaves the Earth in the form of heat. Second law of thermodynamics is talking about that with every single energy transfer, okay, it's going to increase the entropy of the system, so the disorder. So in order for us to make sure that we maintain order and keep things organized, it's going to require some type of energy, okay? So body temperature, we're all endotherms. That means that we're going to regulate our body temperature through metabolism. And so you might see a diagram on the exam that's showing the kind of relationship between the temperature outside and the amount of oxygen. And you would find that an organism that is an endotherm is going to have higher rates of oxygen consumption at lower temperatures because of the fact that they're going to need to undergo more cellular respiration in order to keep their bodies warmer. And the final electron acceptor is oxygen. And so we would see an increase in the amount of oxygen consumed because they're going through metabolism more frequently. Okay. So here you can kind of see the internal temperature would stay constant no matter what the outside temperature is. And so an example of that would, of course, be this little mouse right here. An ectotherm is what you learned about in elementary school as a cold-blooded organism. Their blood isn't actually cold, although you like to think it is. And this means that they're going to maintain their body temperature using different behaviors. So, like an alligator is going to bask in the sun when it gets cold, and it may go for a swim when it gets too hot. And they also have little scoots along their backs that kind of help to release their heat. There's all kinds of other things they'll do, but they're more or less are looking at their behaviors can allow for their temperature. And so we'll see a different organism here. I'm sorry, a different graph here, where a lower temperature, we see different internal temperature. And as the outside temperature increases, then the inside temperature of the organism is also going to increase. And that would be like this little snake here, okay? So we also have different trophic structures, okay? So at the very bottom, we have our autotrophs. These are the organisms that are able to kind of make their own chemical energy. So they can capture energy from different organic, inorganic materials, or they can capture it from kind of the sunlight. And then they can convert that into usable energy so that they will be consumed by other organisms. So like our photosynthetic organisms are going to use the sunlight, use the kind of prefix of photo to help you remember that. And their chemosynthetic organisms are going to use smaller inorganic molecules in the environment. Sometimes it's in the absence of oxygen. So this could be like in our deep sea vents where they're going to go through different kind of chemosynthetics there's no light down there, in order to generate that energy. Okay, or actually they don't generate the energy. They use the energy from those chemical inorganic substances to make organic substance that can then be consumed. And then we have our heterotrophs. Heterotrophs are going to get the energy that are in other organisms. So they're going to be consuming other organisms. So that's like your primary consumer, secondary, tertiary consumer, and so on. And so they're going to metabolize carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. Something to also notice is that they don't use nucleic acids to break down and to get any type of energy. And so all of the other ones, so the carbs, the lipids, the proteins can all be used for hydrolysis in order to kind of get that energy from it. And so we're going to see the energy goes from the autotrophs to the heterotrophs. And so it says, do we need to know the chemo and photo auto heterotrophics? Yeah, I would probably know about those. There were questions in the past, different exams that have those words in there. And so recognizing those words helps, as well as if you have a free response question, you could then apply those words. So we have this kind of trophic structure here. And so you can kind of see our primary producers are at the bottom. Our primary consumers are going to be those herbivores that are consuming those primary producers. Our secondary consumers are going to be carnivores consuming our primary consumers. Tertiary consumes secondary, and quaternary consumes tertiary. And we usually don't go much farther than that because of the fact that there is a decrease in the amount of energy that can go from one energy level to the next. And so here you can kind of see on the outside the amount of energy that's stored in that biomass. And so there is a decrease in it. There's about a 10% rule, and so we only get about 10% of the energy moved on. Because as you see, every single one of these organisms is releasing heat, okay? Now, after any of them die, they'll then be broken down by the decomposers that, of course, can use that as their energy source, and then that will recycle a lot of those nutrients back out into the ground, okay? So now there's different changes in the availability. So in terms of our trophic structure, maybe we could see if there's a decrease in our primary producers, that's going to then cause every single level afterward to be decreased because of the fact that they have less food, which then leads to the next one not having enough food, and there's a decrease in their population, decreasing. We also could see a decrease based on different nutrients, and so if there is a lack of nutrients in the soil, that could lead to different problems going upstream from there. As my students were working through different practice exam questions this past week, one of the things they were noticing is that there's this term is called direct. And so they may give you a question that shows you, oh, well, there's this, I don't know, primary consumer that's gone. How would that affect other organisms? And so they went to like tertiary consumers, one of the answer choices. But that's not a direct connection. So you want to make sure that you're kind of, whenever they give you and they're asking you, what is the direct connection? Go to something that's like literally directly next to it, that this causes that. Don't look for like a couple layers in a system. Okay, so that gets us through that part of it about the energy. Now let's move into animal behavior. So animals need to be able to communicate with each other. They need to be able to find food, find a mate, of course, know about different types of dangers that might be around. So this is the type of signaling that can occur, and this will change the behavior of an organism, and it allows for differential reproductive success. So it's allowing them to be able to survive, and then of course reproduce, passing on their traits to future generations. So first one they have is visual communication. So like a firefly may glow, and we've had questions before about this, about the luciferase, and how that enzyme's allowing for that glowing. We've also had free response questions where we're looking at reproductive behaviors with them and about the flashing of them. There's been phylogeny questions. And so there's a lot that you can do just with like a visual behavior. And so fireflies will use this to attract a mate. We also know that our peacocks are going to use their tails in different courtship rituals in order to attract a mate. You do know that the peacocks are the ones that are beautifully colored and that the other ones are called peahens and that together they're peafowl. I hope you did know that. If not, you learned something new. Anyways, cobras are going to inflate their hood so that they can scare off other creatures. And so that's kind of like a kind of a visual communication to kind of ward off danger. We also have auditory, so different elephants can kind of use their trunks to go long distance. I've also watched a video that was on HHMI where there's different stomping patterns, and based on the stomping pattern, it can sense danger or food or different other materials that might be nearby. Whales are going to use their song to communicate with their females, and then wolves are going to howl to call other wolves that are part of their packs. In terms of electrical, that's going to just usually deal with some type of electrical signal. We also have tactile. Okay, tactile is going to deal with when the pup will lick. I'm sorry, the dog will lick his pup to kind of stimulate and get that kind of. It's not really looking at imprinting, but it's kind of similar to imprinting, where they're going to kind of then clean it off and be able to bond with their young. We also have baboons are going to touch and kind of groom each other. They'll kind of go through each other's hair and get all the bugs. And then horses will kick other horses to establish their dominance, lots of fun. And then we also have chemical. Okay, so cats can rub up against different objects to mark them with their scent. Notice that the cat is always running around your house and kind of rubbing off against everything. Ants are going to use a pheromone trail. So if you're ever trying to get rid of ants that you see like this big long line of them, just clean up the trail and you won't have the ants in that line anymore. And you'll be able to hopefully stop them from going to wherever that source is. Skunks can also use their smell to kind of get rid of different predators. And if y'all have questions as we're going through this, you're welcome to throw them in the chat and I'll answer them as we go. There is about a, 5 to 10 second delay, but hopefully I can, get your answer. So different functions that the communication can allow for us to indicate dominance, forage, so we can find food, we can establish territory, as well as we can establish reproductive success. There are also altruistic behaviors. Altruistic behavior deals with something that is going to decrease your own fitness, but it's going to help the fitness of the rest of the individuals. And so what I mean by fitness is, if you didn't catch it from the Unit 7, fitness is just talking about your ability to survive and then pass on those traits to the next generation. And so if we're talking about, the Belding squirrels, okay, there's one of them that is on guard. They're kind of watching out for predators. When the Belding squirrel makes this loud call, wow, 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 it tells the other squirrels, hey, there's a predator, go hide. But as it makes that noise, it tells the predator where it is, and there's a high chance it's going to be consumed. But by making that call, it's going to allow all the other individuals that are in the kind of group to hide. So it increases the group's fitness instead of increasing their fitness. Okay. And that's where that inclusive fitness has to do with. It's talking about like the group, the whole population as a whole. So we also have different types of selections. So we already mentioned about the peacocks, okay? But we also have where there's just, with intersexual selection, there's a choosing, okay? Either a male is choosing a female or the female is choosing the male. And so whichever one is trying to attract the mate is going to do some type of behavior to attract that mate. My favorite example is the blue-footed boobies. They have these beautiful little blue feet, and they're going to go up and they're going to show off their little feet. And that little dance then can attract the mate and say, hey, you know what? I've got the bluest feet. I've got the best genes. You want to mate with me. And so like, it's just kind of like a cool little way that they attract their mates. They also do this little thing where they like lift their wings up and kind of like, it's all part of their dance. We also have frogs. They'll kind of croak, and that's like an auditory signal, of course, to trying to attract their mates. Pheromones. So we all have pheromones that we release to try to attract mates. If you have a dog or a cat that's in heat, you probably notice that there's a lot of additional cats and dogs in the neighborhood that are kind of coming around your house when that's happening. And it's because they're releasing these pheromones out to say, hey, it's time for us to reproduce, and all of these other kind of other individuals in the area trying to come. Intra-sexual selection. If I wasn't on camera and, audio mic'd up and all that, I would definitely scream at you, because that's what I do in my classroom. Like this little raw, I'm like, ah, I'm like yelling, I'm like, because this is like fighting, right? When two individuals of the same sex are fighting for the chance to mate with the other. And so this is a reproductive event. They're showing their dominance, and this is allowing them to compete for their mate. So you can hear that the deer are going to have their antler size, and then they kind of pump into each other to try to show that, no, I'm dominant. I'm supposed to mate with all the women. We also have our horn beetles. This is showing different size and strength of those horns. That's also showing their fighting. Do organisms trying to impress for mating, like this would lead to evolution? Yes and no. And so any type that you have like selection, sexual selection is going to lead to evolution. Thinking about like Hardy Weinberg and the 5 conditions, we wanted there to be random mating. And so since this is non-random mating, there's a choosiness, so it will lead to evolution. Also, when we think back to, I think it was last week, we did the question with the guppies and about how their colors were. And we said that the brightly colored guppies were going to be more likely to be seen by predators, which means they're more likely to be consumed. And so there could be changes due to that. And so we kind of always have to think about that holistically. And so population ecology, we've got math to do. I know you all love math. And just as a quick blurb, don't forget I'm doing every single math problem on the formula sheet in a little video. So like if there's like a question on your formula sheet, you can go through there. I think I have 8 more videos to make before I'm done with them all. There was a question in the chat, what is the difference between intersexual and intrasexual? Intersexual is between different sexes. So the male is attracting a female or the female is attracting a male. And so it's like a choosiness versus intrasexual. They're the same sex fighting for the opposite sex. And so the other one has actually no control over who wins the right to fight. To mate. So it's kind of like, think about like the alpha males in different situations. Like the alpha male is fighting to say, I'm going to mate with all these females. Oh, lovely. Okay, so population ecology. So we have exponential growth. This means that there's an unlimited growth to our population. They've got unlimited resources. They've got unlimited space. There's literally nothing stopping them from growing. They are just going to keep growing. Okay. And so we'll see this as Rn or R max N. R being our intrinsic rate of increase and N being our population size. And so you see over time that they grow exponentially. We see that as a J-shaped curve. And so R is our birth rate minus our death rate. So the rate of increase is just birth minus death. And so the questions they may give you the birth rate and the death rate, and you just have to find this intrinsic rate of increase, or you might have to do a little bit more with it. Okay. dN over dt, although that looks just like calculus, and you're like, Miss Jones, why are we doing calculus? We're not doing calculus. But so the dN over dt, although it's a derivative, is just looking at that rate. It's looking at the slope. And so it's just saying that the change in our population size over our change in time is just R times N. So a different example, if we have a population of 400 individuals with a rate of increase of 0.5, after how many individuals would there be after 2 generations? Now, those of you in calculus probably have a better, more eloquent way to solve this, but I like to show it step by step. And so sorry that this is probably not the way you want to do it, but it's the way I'm going to do it using the formula that the College Board has given us. So yay. So we'll sub it in. We've got our R being our 0.5 and our N being 400. So after our first generation, our first time, we have 200 that we gained. Okay. So 400 plus 200 gives me 600. So when I go through it to figure out the second generation, my N is now 600 because my population grew to 600. So I'm still going to have my 0.5 for my R value, and my new N is going to be 600. So the second generation is going to allow us to grow 300 more. So 600 plus 300 gives me 900. So we would see that with our exponential growth, after 2 generations, we would now be at 900 when we started at 400. And so you can kind of see it is growing. The first generation only grew by 200. The second generation grew by 300. So you can see kind of it is increasing, and it would get even higher than that if you kept going. Logistic growth has to do with there's some type of carrying capacity. There's something that regulates, there's something that kind of maintains and keeps it in balance. So there may be a lack of resources, there may be a lack of space, there's a lack of something that is keeping this population in check, okay? And so now we have this K right here. This K stands for carrying capacity, so we still have the R being the intrinsic rate of increase, the N being our population size, K being carrying capacity minus our population size over K being carrying capacity, and I don't know why that says 200. I must have just pulled something earlier when I was trying to like make the PowerPoint. So if a population has 400 individuals with a rate of increase of 0.5 and a carrying capacity of 800, how many individuals after 2 generations? So we were looking at the same problem here, but now we're looking at that there is a carrying capacity. You can't get past 800. There's just not enough resources. There's going to be an increase in competition as you get closer to it. Okay. And I forgot to mention that this is that S-shaped curve. And so this dotted line right here, this is your carrying capacity. So as you get closer to the carrying capacity, your rate, like your growth rate is going to decrease. You're going to see that there is going to be a smaller dn over dt because this numerator here is going to become smaller. And so you're going to kind of see that that slope becomes less. Anyway, so let's sub into our equation. So our R is 0.5, our N was 400, our K was 800, and then of course our N is 400 divided by 800. And so if we solve this out, we would end up with 100. Okay, and so you already can see a difference between the exponential growth versus the logistic growth. So 400 plus 100 gives me 500. So after the first generation, we're at 500. And if we were to do this calculation a second time to figure out the second generation, please ignore this one right here. It should be a 2. We now grow by 75, and so now our population is 500 plus 75, giving me 575. So you can kind of see that the logistic and that carrying capacity is definitely keeping this population in check, okay? So there's these different things called density dependent factors. These are things that are going to kind of limit your population size and then kind of can keep it in check. And it's going to intensify as your population increases. Okay. So disease is a definitely prevalent thing. Think about like a densely populated area versus a less densely populated area. You see there's definitely more disease that's going to happen in there because the individuals are so close together that there's higher chances of transmission. Okay. Predation, if you have more prey, of course, you're going to see more of the predation of it. And then there will be, of course, the competition. There's too many individuals for the space, so we're going to send them together. I don't have a sigma on my board. I don't see where you see sigma, sweetheart, but I don't see a sigma anywhere on my page. So density independent factors. This is going to affect all the individuals regardless of size, okay? So this is something that's going to limit our population. So it's some type of human activity, a natural disaster. So if a tornado comes through, it doesn't really matter how many individuals are there. It's just going to limit them by that, okay? So into community ecology. Okay, so here we see our species diversity. Okay, this is a crazy equation that I do with my students, and it showed up a couple years ago on the exam, and it was a numeric response before it was on the formula sheet, and now it's actually on the formula sheet. And so this is measuring the biodiversity. So biodiversity has a lot to do with our species richness. So how many individuals do we have? Like how many different species do I have as species richness? So if there's 4 different species, my species richness would be 4 versus like if we're looking at, you know, a population that has 2 different species in it. So we're going to see that it's more diverse if you can have more species richness or higher species richness. We also want to look at the general composition of it. So and the abundance of it. So are we looking at that there is a huge amount of one type of species and then just a couple of the other ones, or are they more equally spaced? It's better for biodiversity for them to be equally spaced for us to have the more species in the area. Okay, so our equation that we have on the formula sheet is 1 minus our sigma, n over capital N, and then that's squared. Okay, so this right here is our summation. Okay, so we're going to add each of the values together. Okay, so each of the individual n's divided by the total individuals, and then we'll square those, and then we'll add all of those together. So it makes a little more sense when we look at an example. So let's look at this one. So I have a sloth and a penguin. Of course, there's a penguin. The sloth has 18. This penguin has 13, so that gives me a total of 31. So I'm going to do 1 minus, and then I have my summation. And of course, the system wanted to do crazy stuff with these parentheses, so just go with it. And so I've got 18 sloths divided by 31 total individuals, and I'm going to square that, plus the 13 penguins divided by the 31 total, and I'll square that. Okay, and so if I do 18 divided by 31, I get 0.58. If I get 13 divided by 31, that gives me 0.42. I square each of those, and that's giving me 1 minus 0.34 plus 0.18. So that's going to give me my species richness of 0.48. More richness and evenness in a community means more diversity. Yes, so the more richness it is and the more even it is, it leads to the more biodiversity for the calculation. Okay. We also have different relationships that are going to occur. And I see this a lot on the exam where they're asking about the interactions of different organisms together. And so predator and prey is going to be a positive and a negative. It helps the predator, it hurts the prey. Herbivories also, same thing with predator prey, but now their prey is some type of photosynthetic material. And so we've got a plus because the herbivore is gaining resources. The negative is for the plant materials that are being consumed. Competition is negative, negative. If two individuals are in the exact same niche or niche, however you want to say it, then you're going to find that they're using those same resources and one of them is going to either have to change their niche and do something else, or you're going to go through the competitive exclusion where one of them will now go away. We also have parasitism, which is where we have positive, negative. The parasite can either be an endoparasite and be on the inside or an ectoparasite and be on the outside. Again, use your prefix to help you out. So endo means in, ecto means out. And then, of course, mutualism is looking at plus plus, so they're going to be equal, both benefiting. There was a question a couple years ago about an obligate versus a facultative. Obligate mutualism means that they're obligated to be together. They cannot live without the opposite. So like a termite. A termite has protozoa that live in its intestines. And the protozoa is what actually can break down the cellulose because the termite actually can't. And so if you were to give a termite antibiotics and kill the protozoa and all the materials that are inside of its gut, then it would actually starve to death because it is obligated to be together. Okay. Thank you for helping each other in the chat, by the way. Commensalism is going to be positive and zero, meaning that one of them is benefited and one of them has no effect. Okay. And I like a lot of them kind of go either way in terms of like the commensalism. So sometimes there's a factor they don't actually know about. But in terms of our lesson, we're just going to talk about plus and then no effect. So we also have these keystone species. So they're disproportionate. There's going to be, may not have a large number of them, but they have a huge impact on the environment. That if something was to happen to your keystone species, it's going to cause a collapse of the entire ecosystem. Bye-bye. Okay. And so if removed, they cause a collapse. And so the example we have are our sea otters. Okay. So our sea otters are keystone species, and their job, what they do, they consume sea urchins. Okay. And sea urchins eat kelp. And so the sea otter eating the sea urchins keeps the sea urchin population in check, and it makes it so there's not too many sea urchins, okay? If we were to lose the sea otter and the sea otter goes away, that causes the sea urchins to no longer be held in check, and then they're going to overgraze this kelp, and we lose the kelp forest. And so they can be destroying that kelp forest if we see a decrease in our keystone species of our sea otter. So last but not least, we have our invasive species. Invasive species are pests, if you may, okay? They're not indigenous, they're not native to the area, and because of that, when they come into an area, there's no natural predators for them, there's nothing that's going to consume them, there's nothing that's going to keep them in check, so they go through that exponential growth pattern. And they also have unlimited resources. So an example would be the zebra mussel. I have a video that I show with my class. It's like more of an animation than anything, but it shows like where they started, and it kind of shows them all on the river streams kind of taking over because of the fact that they've been able to fill in. Is phantom tax a form of parasitism or mutualism? I don't know what phantom tax is. Sorry, sweetheart. The lionfish is also a venomous species, and it's also taking over in the area. Okay, so on to our review, our practice questions. Okay. So testosterone oxyreductase is a liver enzyme that regulates testosterone levels in alligators. One study compares testosterone between males and female alligators from Lake Woodruff, which is a pristine environment, and then Lake Appa whatever. It's an area that is suffered a severe contamination. Okay, so we've got this contamination in one of them, and it's perfectly in the other. I'm sorry for crying. The graph above depicts the findings of that study. Okay, so we have this graph showing us, and they're wanting us to say the data in the graph best supports with the following claims. Okay. So what they're wanting you to do is they want you to use the data to answer the question. And so I can kind of look through this and I see this talking about elevating the activity with contamination. Okay. So let's first kind of look about this and say, okay, well, which one is pristine, which one's contaminated? Okay. So this one over here is my contaminated and this one is pristine, is in good condition. Okay. So if I look at the females, okay, I can see that the female error bars do not overlap, which means that if we're comparing kind of the level of it, I see a reduction in it in the contaminated area. Okay, and I see that in females. If I were to look at the males, I see that their error bars do overlap. So there's no statistical data to back this. And so that would tell me that my answer would be B, okay? That the contamination is going to reduce the testosterone octave reductase level in our female. Okay, so here's our female, and we, of course, use the data. I did find recently, after doing some of these review sessions, that y'all don't know what I'm talking about when I say that the error bars overlap. So let me talk for a second. So you can see right here that they both go through this Y value of 200. If they share Y values, that means that their error bars are overlapping. First, if you look here, this one's bottom is at like, I don't know, 250, 260. And this one's top's at like, I don't know, 190 or so. And so because of that difference, their Ys do not kind of overlap. So their error bars don't overlap. So this data is statistically significant versus the males are not statistically significant. So beaked whales feed at various depths, but they defecate at the ocean surface. Nitrogen-rich whale feces deposited in surface water supply nutrients for algae that are eaten by surface-dwelling fish. Wait, what? So a strategy you could use is draw yourself a picture. So I've got a whale, and the whale is going to defecate, which then provides nutrients for my algae. Yeah, that was the best I could come up with for an algae, sorry. And then the algae is going to be food for my fish. Okay, let's keep going. Which line best predicts what would happen if the whale population decreased? So if I have less whales, so bye-bye whales, what's going to happen? So come up with what you think on your own. So I think without whales, that means there's going to be a decrease in nutrients. And if there's a decrease in nutrients, then I'm probably going to see that the algae population is going to see some type of decrease, may not have enough nutrients. There's something of that. And then that's probably going to cause a decrease to my fishies that are supposed to eat my algae, okay? And so let's look through. There'd be a reduction in surface nitrogen concentration. That's logical. So it's talking about that we don't have as much of the defecation, cool, which would cause an algal bloom. Algal blooms are due to having more and too much of the nitrogen. So A is out. B, the surface fish populations would decline due to reduced population of algae. That is exactly what we came up with on our own. We thought of it. We said, okay, well, there's less of this. So then there's less nutrients for the algae, which means there's a decrease in the algae. And then that would cause a decrease in our fish. I like that answer. Then it also says we've got our remaining whales would accumulate mutations. How does a decrease in defecation going to cause a mutation? Now, the remaining whales would be forced to forage the deepest parts of the ocean. All we're looking at is the defecation and how that affects the other individuals. Okay. So yes, you are right. It is B. Thank you, sweetheart. You did a great job. Okay. The off-topic question, I will answer it at the end. Okay. So scientists have found that existing populations of certain species of amphibians are small in number and lack in genetic diversity, and they're separated from each other by wide areas of dry land. Which of following human actions is most likely to improve the long-term survival of an amphibian? Okay, so we're looking for long-term survival. We see that they are lacking in genetic diversity, so we need to find some way to increase their diversity because we're looking at some type of bottleneck situation. Okay, and so if I clone the largest individuals, will that counteract an aggressive predation? Is that even what I'm talking about? Reducing population size to 1/5 to decrease competition. So if I decrease the population even more, that's going to add even more to my bottleneck because I'm going to arbitrarily pick individuals. And so the new representative, the new population isn't going to be representative of the original population. That's going to be a problem. Okay. C, we're going to construct a dam to irrigate system to control flooding. Again, it's a dry area. Why do I need that to happen? Or am I going to build a pond in area of dry land to promote interbreeding? So if I have, the slides are not on the PowerPoint, but the slides are not on the website, but they will be soon. So if I have a pond in the middle, could the amphibian go from one pond to the next pond, and then from that pond to the next pond? And now we're going to increase the amount of gene flow that can take place. And because of that increase in gene flow, that can increase my genetic diversity because this population can now interact with this population, which will allow for an increase in their genetic diversity. Okay, so that leads us to D being right. Good job, Sydney. So 2013, we don't really need to talk about the animal behaviors that are in A and B, though it's more looking at the experimental design part of it. And so in interest of time, I was trying to just cut those. We've got another, I think, 3 more FRQs, so I was just trying to not go too far over an hour. So the experiment that's described is repeated. The big experiment is talking about that they put some glucose at the 2 ends of a choice chamber. They then inserted a bunch of fruit flies in there, and they were observing where the fruit flies were going to go. Okay. So they repeated this experiment in which we put a ripe banana at one end and an unripe banana at the other end. We then observed the position of these flies every 10 minutes. I'm sorry, every minute for 10 minutes. And so they gave you the data of 1 minute and 10 minutes with the ripe banana, the middle, and then the unripe banana. And you have to perform a chi-square. Yes, I chose this problem because I knew you all loved chi-square just as much as my students did when they wrote me notes last week about making them do another chi-square problem. So perform a chi-square test on the data for 10-minute time point in the banana experiment, and we have to specify the null hypothesis that you're testing and enter the values from calculation into the table, and then we're going to explain what that hypothesis means, okay? So first thing, what is a null hypothesis, okay? A null hypothesis is stating that the independent variable has no effect on the dependent variable, okay? And so it's important that you explain based on your experiment, okay? So since we're looking at the bananas, okay, the banana has no effect on the position of the fruit flies. There will be an equal distribution of the fruit flies in all 3 areas. You're basically saying that the ripe, unripe, no banana, that has no effect on where we're going to find them. Okay. So the presence of a banana, ripe or unripe, has no effect on the location of the flies in the choice chamber. The flies will be equally distributed between the regions of the choice chamber. Okay. And then we have to fill in our chart. Now, this is the chart they gave you. Okay. I personally do not use this type of chart when doing a chi-square. I do one where I pull out each of the components. I've got the observed minus expected, my observed minus expected, my observed minus expected squared, my observed minus expected squared over expected, and then I add all those together. But you're definitely able to use this short little graph, okay? So what did I observe? So I'm looking at after 10 minutes. So after 10 minutes, there was 45 that were in this kind of ripe banana side. There was 5 in the middle, and then there was 12 in the unripe, okay? That gives us a total of 60, okay? Yes, and any difference that you saw in the location was due to chance, is based on that null. Okay, so what I expected to have all of them kind of equally distributed. So 60 divided by 3 is 20. So I would expect there to be 20 in each of the sections. And so if you were to do this math and you did 45 minus 20 squared divided by 20, you would get 31.25, which is a very large number. 3 minus 20 squared over 20 gives you 14.45. 12 minus 20 squared over 20 gives me 3.2. If you add those together, you get 48.9. Okay. And actually on this exam, they didn't care if you got your chi-square calculation correct. They just wanted you to say what that number meant in respect to the table value. Okay. So we've done the calculation. We know what our chi-squares is 48.9. How does that compare to my table value? How does that compare to my critical value? Okay. So since I have 3 different options, I've got the end of the ripe banana, I've got the middle, and I've got the end with the unripe banana. Okay, so I've got the 3 different choices. My degree of freedom is going to be 3 minus 1, so it's going to be 2 degrees of freedom. So that's going to be right here. Okay, so my degree of freedom, I'm going to do it at a 0.05 p-value because that means a 95% confidence, and gives me 5.99. So how does my value compare to this value? Okay, well, my value is very far away and it's very large. So my number is larger than the table value. So you're going to reject your null hypothesis. So at at p equals 0.05 with 2 degrees of freedom, the calculated value is greater than the table or critical value. So we will reject the null hypothesis. The banana ripeness has an effect on our fly distribution. Okay, so now you may have heard this from your teacher. You may not have heard this from your teacher. The best words to use in terms of the AP stat or statistics ballpark is fail to reject or reject your null. You're not really going to say accept the null. If you look at the past papers, they have been accept the null, but who knows what's going to happen as we move forward. So it's best to just use correct terminology. So if the number that you calculate is less than the table value, you're going to fail to reject. If the number that you get is greater than the table value, you are going to reject the null, okay? So moving on to another question. The table below shows how much each organism in an aquatic ecosystem relies on various food sources. The rows represent the organisms in the ecosystem. So here's the algae, the stonefly, the midge, the hail grammets, and the caddisflies. And the columns represent the food source. So this is all the stuff that they are consuming as well as the percents. Indicates the proportional dietary composition of each organism. High percents indicate strong dependence on the organism as a food source. Okay. So based on the food sources indicated in the table, construct a food web on the template. So they've given us a template. This is similar to what we might see on question 5 on the exam, because question 5 is going to be some type of template like this. It may not be a food web, but it'll be some type of template that you're modifying. Write the organism names on the appropriate lines and draw the arrows necessary to indicate the energy flow between the organisms in the ecosystem, okay? So here I've got the midges, okay? And I know that something is consuming the midges. So what has 100% consumption of, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. Yeah, what has 100% consumption? That's looking at the algae. So the midges have 100% consumption of the algae. I mentioned it wrong, I'm sorry. The arrowhead is like you eating. Anyways. So midges 100% eat the algae. So I know that my lowest one is algae, which I know that because it's a photosynthetic organism, okay? So what is going to consume the midges now? So the midges are being consumed by the stoneflies, the hail grammets, and the caddisflies, okay? So I now need to figure out something that's going to consume midges and maybe algae, because algae is still down here. And that would be my caddisflies. So I can see that my caddisflies are going to be next. And I'm going to need to draw an arrow from the algae to the caddisflies because they consume algae as well as consuming the midges, okay? I then want to say, okay, well, what's going to consume midges and maybe caddisflies? So I can see that the stoneflies consume the midges and they consume the caddisflies. So I'll draw an arrow from the caddisflies to the stoneflies. Again, they're consuming them. And the last one I haven't done is the hail grammets. And those ones are going to consume stoneflies, midges, and caddisflies. And so I need to have an arrow from the stoneflies to the hail grammets, as well as from the caddisflies to the hail grammets. Algae, midges, caddisflies, stoneflies, hail grammets. Great job, Epic. And so you can kind of see that this is what the graph would look like. So I think on this one, you got points for having in the right positions, and then you had 1 point for having your arrows correct. So you had to have all these arrows correct in order to have gotten that second point. Okay. So in an effort to control the number of midges in an area within the ecosystem, they sprayed the certain fungus that decreases this midge population. So we have less of these midges. They're kind of gone. So we now need to figure out, well, what relies on those midges, okay? So based on the data in the table, predict whether the spraying of fungus will have the greatest short-term impact on the stoneflies, caddisflies, or the hail grammets, okay? So which of these things will have the highest impact? Well, they told us in the prompt that a high percent means that there's a strong dependence on it. So which one has the highest percent? Is definitely in the wrong spot. I'm sorry. We need to be circling the midges. Sorry, when I copied and pasted over, I must have missed that rotating on that one. Okay, so which one has the highest in the midges? That's going to, of course, be our stoneflies. So we would see that our stoneflies are going to have the highest percent because there's the highest dependence on them over the hail grammets and the caddisflies. You could also use numbers. You could say that the midges are 90% of the stonefly, 30% of the caddisfly, and 10% of the hail grammets diet. So you could then show that it would be the stoneflies that would be the most impacted. So on to our last FRQ. So some birds, including our great spotted cuckoos, lay their eggs in the nests of other birds, such as the reed warblers. Reed warbler parents raise unrelated chicks and provide them with food that would otherwise be given to their biological offspring. So what's happening? Our warbler parents are going to feed these cuckoo birds that have been just placed in their nest. Okay. The researcher conducted an investigation to determine the type of relationship between warblers and cuckoos in an environment without predators. The researcher found that the nests containing only warblers were more likely to be successful than nests containing warblers and cuckoos. Duh. They were giving food to the other organism instead of their own kids. A successful nest is defined as a nest where at least one chick becomes an adult warbler. In some geographic areas, several species of nest predators are present. Researchers have found that the cuckoo chicks, while in the nest, produce a smelly substance that deters nest predators. So the cuckoos are going to release some chemical, and that chemical causes predators not to attack the nest. The substance does not remain in the nest if the cuckoos are removed. Wait a minute. So if I take the cuckoo out, it's not still there? Oh, okay. Figure 1 shows the probability. Why is that off on the side? Whatever. Probability that the nest containing only warblers and containing both warblers and cuckoos will be successful in the environment with predators. In a follow-up experiment, researchers added cuckoos to the nest that contained only something, warblers, and removed a nest containing warblers and cuckoos. Okay. So I guess I doubled the picture. Okay. So here we can kind of see that image right there. So describe the symbiotic relationship that exists between the cuckoo and the warbler in an environment without predators. So when the predators are not there, the warbler is feeding the cuckoo instead of its own offspring. So wait a minute. One of them is positively impacted. One of them is negatively impacted. Oh, it's a predator. Okay. So the cuckoo, I'm sorry, not predator. It's parasite. The cuckoos are a parasite. Okay. They're taking all the food from the warblers. Okay. So, and though the cuckoo is benefited, the warbler is harmed. Okay. Because if you kind of recall, the cuckoos lay their eggs in the nest of warblers. Warbler parents raise the unrelated chicks and provide them with food that would otherwise be given to their own offspring. Okay. And then here we're supposed to, on this template, draw bars in the appropriate location to predict the relative probability of the success of a nest in the presence of a predator. Okay, so here I have only warblers, and if I add cuckoo birds to it, the cuckoo birds we said are going to release a chemical. That chemical is going to inhibit the predators and it's going to cause them not to want to attack. Okay, and so we're going to see that the cuckoo added is going to increase the nest probability. I'm sorry, success. Okay, because of the fact that we're going to have less predators attacking it. Okay, versus if I remove the cuckoo, it told me that the scent went away with the cuckoos. So if I take the cuckoo bird out of the nest, it's going to be attacked more. And so we're going to see a decrease. So as long as the bar you drew was higher than this bar, as long as this bar that you drew was lower than this bar, you got credit for this. So there wasn't like a specific number that you had to have. I just arbitrarily put these bars on here just to signify greater or less than, okay? And then part C, as Epic has already told us, the symbiotic relationship that exists between the cuckoo and the warbler in the presence of the predator is going to be mutualism because of the fact that the warbler is going to get kind of protection from predators, while the cuckoo is going to get food. Okay, so now is our Q&A moment. So if you have any questions, you could go ahead and throw them into the chat while I tell you a couple of things, because I know there is a little bit of a lag between you and me. So real quick, a reminder, I'm going to be doing a cram session on Saturday on my YouTube account. So Saturday the 11th, so literally a week from today at 3 o'clock, we're going to go live. I'm going to do a review session going over, of course, anything that I can come up with. Is probably going to be a quick review of all the units, and I will talk as fast as I'm talking today, if not faster. And then on Wednesday, 5:15, I'm doing a cram session with Marco Learning. Okay, I'm going to be honest with you, it's probably going to be a very similar session. The only differences would be students questioning. And so you can go to either of those sessions and still get help from them. This one gives you more time to do something with that help. This one gives you less time. But again, it is 8 p.m. and your exam isn't until 16 hours later, because it's at noon the next day. So you've got plenty of time. Also, other resources, as I already said, Marco Learning. I've got all of the videos with Marco Learning. You can check out any of their stuff. If you check out the same stuff on my page, I get the views. So, there's always that advantage. Absolute Recap is one of my friends, Melanie Kingett. She's also going to be doing some live streams. So check out her page. She's got a bunch of live stuff that can help you. And then etch.com. So if you are, wanting some type of session that can kind of help you to practice, you'll answer questions. You then mark this little symbol and say whether you, how you feel about it, and then it's going to give you some information about it, and you can mark if it's correct or incorrect. If it's correct, it's going to kind of put that one on the back burner. If it's incorrect, it's going to keep giving you that question each day. They also have, I think it's U.S. history with Heimler, and they've integrated some of his videos into it. I think it's U.S. history, yeah. And so, whenever you are done, and you get the feedback, they've integrated these different videos. So if you're in APUSH, that also can help you with that. I'm all about free stuff, and so they've got, of course, free resources for you. Okay, so back to the Q&A. Oh yeah, don't forget to follow all the accounts. So in terms of our Q&A, so somebody asked earlier about difference between positive and negative feedback. So not feedback, they said about controls, okay? So your negative control is going to be the one that doesn't have the treatment group, okay? And so we're going to be seeing that it's going to have, it's going to be what we're going to compare to see, does the treatment do something, okay? Versus a positive control is going to be the one that we know is going to happen. So good example I can use would be your transformation experiment, in which you were trying to transform bacteria to make it antibiotic resistant. And so you had the bacteria and you did not give it the the plasmid and you didn't grow it in the presence of the antibiotic and it grew. That would be your negative control. It doesn't have the treatment group. And of course, this is ensuring that the bacteria is viable, that I did nothing to the bacteria in this process. The positive control in this experiment would be the one without the plasmid in the presence of the antibiotic. It should not have grown in the presence of the antibiotic. I know this for a fact. So I'm confirming, does it not grow? Because then I can compare that to with plasmid in the presence of the antibiotic. And I can say, oh, it was the plasmid and only the plasmid that allowed it to grow. And so it allows you to kind of determine what in the experiment was leading to the results. Okay. So different questions we have. What is the difference between parasitism and predator-prey? Predator-prey is one consuming the other. Versus parasitism is going to be usually taking resources. And so like a flea is a ectoparasite. It's going to get onto the surface of your animal, your cat, your dog, your whatever, and it actually sucks its blood and takes nutrients from it. A tapeworm is an endoparasite. As you digest food, it just takes your nutrients from you, so it just steals from you. Okay. Do our FRQ answers have to be on point with the answer key? No, there's something called kid speak. And so, like, as long as we can understand that you know what you're talking about and you've answered the right question, then you can usually get credit. What you see is a scoring guideline. You're not seeing a rubric. So we have these things called table notes. And so there's additional things that we accept that may not be on those because of the fact that we're looking at your kid speak. We're trying to make sure that you know the content and not because you don't have some big advanced degree in biology over this information. Okay. Don't talk it. Can you describe questions on the FRQ packet? Earlier you said, okay. So if you want to know the actual set down up of the FRQs, I would number one go to the 2021 through 2023 FRQs and you can look at what they look like. But the CED will map out exactly how everyone's going to be. So the first question is going to be some type of experimental question. They're designing something and you're going to pull some information from the experiment with the results. The past 3 years has been a cell communication question. So I think that it might be another cell communication question. If not, there's going to be a cell communication question somewhere on this exam. That's one of my predictions. The second question, you're going to have to graph. 100% you have to graph. Students oftentimes mess up in terms of that they don't scale their axes correctly. If you're running short on time, scale your axis and put the labels on it. You should at least get 1 point there. You'll get another point for plotting points. You'll get another point probably for your error bar or just having the right graph. So a lot of students screw up on what type of graph it is. So if you have linear data, it's a line graph. If you have categorical data, it's a bar graph. And then if you have 3 sets of data, like and you're looking at individuals and then 2 things that you're seeing the connection between them, that's a scatter plot. So there's slightly different graphs that they can have. Bar and whisker is on the CED as a graph you need to be able to do. It's never been on the exam before, but that doesn't mean you won't have to potentially graph it this year. The third question is usually some type of experimental design question. It was enzymes a couple years ago, but it's usually some type of data analysis. The fourth question, I don't have them all memorized. The fifth question is going to be where you're going to have to annotate a graph. One of them was an invasive species question. One last year was a phylogenetic tree, and you had to put the different traits on the tree. I don't remember what the other one was, but there was you were drawing little fishies into like a experiment. I think you were seeing if they were like seagrass and you were drawing the experimental design. And then the sixth question is literally data analysis. And so the past 2 years, like I've told students, you could just go to the sixth question and pull out the data from the graph, and that can be some quick, easy points. Okay, so can I go through the phases of succession? So like you have your pioneer species, which are going to be the ones that kind of get everything started. And then after that, once they deteriorate, you've got the bacteria that's going to break them down, adding more nutrients to the soil. That's allowing you to get kind of larger and larger. And then as those bigger canopy trees kind of come and they shed light, it kind of decreases some of that. So primary succession has to do with that there is no soil. Secondary succession means that there is soil. So if we were to have a fire that like wiped out a certain area, then you're going to see that we'd be dealing with secondary succession instead of primary succession. Okay, so what else we got? How many do you need for a passing score? Based on the kind of released one we have for the 2020 exam, I think it's like a 50 something percent. I don't have it memorized because I don't have you to have the goal to just get a 3. I want you to get 5. Remember, AP Battle Bang was a dress success. Okay, what is the percentage transfer? The percentage transfer is 10. I cannot go over phylogenetic graphs because of the fact that, well, this is a Unit 8 video. I have tons of them on my website where I've gone through each of those. Are there any other questions that we have dealing with ecology? If not, I'm going to log off because I have plans today. Okay, so it doesn't look like we have any other questions. So